How do you convince the world that they need a new water brand? You make it exciting and unlike any other water brand in the world. To achieve that level of differentiation and brand awareness, you might need an advertising creative at the helm with a strong internal team to come up with ideas like having an adult actress star in an ad or hiring an actual witch to attend the Super Bowl. Or maybe you infuse Tony Hawk's blood in skateboards. Or you give Steve-O a liquid death water tattoo. Now, that's how Liquid Death rose the ranks to brand stardom. Rocketing into the minds of consumers across the country, Liquid Death was founded in 2018 by Mike Cesario, and around 10 months ago, he hired Andy Pearson as the VP of Creative. I sit with Andy this episode and have one of the most exciting conversations I've ever had on this podcast. Everything comes full circle, and it's quite beautiful of an episode for a man that works for a company called Liquid Death Mountain Water and whose tagline is "Murder Your Thirst." I'll give you a glimpse. Andy and his friends were able to sell dozens of cookies for $500 each to visit a special Riviera in France. It's part love story, part great branding and break-ins. Andy is willing to connect with you actually after if you listen to this entire episode. To do that, you'll have to visit our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. All one word, at Breaking and Entering Pod. You can connect with Andy and you can see his list of recommended resources just for you. This is really an exciting episode, and I can't wait for you to listen. Of the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. And as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. Andy Pearson, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. This is a special episode. This is an interesting episode. This is one I've been excited for. And a lot of my friends that I've talked to are excited to hear this episode because I've been hinting at it with them. So, Andy, welcome. Tell us who you are and why you are here.
Ooh, that's a lot of pressure that I'm going to have to perform now. I'm Andy Pearson. I am the VP of Creative at Liquid Death. First time over on the brand side of things, I guess. So, yeah, I kind of had like an interesting journey here and sort of now work at a super non-traditional brand for sure.
Yes. And the work you guys have been doing has been hilarious. My parents talk about it. Everybody in the industry definitely talks about it. But even outside the industry, because I know we could be in a bubble sometimes where we're constantly consuming content and what's making like industry trade publications. You guys have transcended that and really just penetrated people and outside of our little sphere of influence. So I think that's so interesting, and I'm curious. I want to talk about like the methods behind it, some of the great work I know you guys did. The porn star one recently. I know you guys tattooed the guy from Jackass, well, Steve-O. You gave him a tattoo and only water came out, and the kids drinking in the Super Bowl. You guys are just, you're not afraid. You're not intimidated, and you guys have your voice. So I'm excited to talk all about that.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. But yeah, your role here at Liquid Death, you're VP of Creative, and you've been there for about a year now. So how has that been? Tell us, what does it mean to be the VP of Creative at Liquid Death?
Yeah, I've been there probably closer to like actually 9 months. It was, it's very, very different coming from the agency world onto the brand side. Actually, a really, kind of an initially tough decision for me personally. I had previously been at McKinney LA and was trying to grow the West Coast operations of the agency out here when the opportunity arose at Liquid Death. The founder and CEO Mike Cesario reached out and just was like, "Hey man, what are you up to?" And we started talking from there. And the I think the incredible thing about Liquid Death is we were founded by a creative, Mike. I kind of either crossed paths or had some like ships passing the night kind of things with him throughout my career at Crispin and at Humanot, and then in the freelance world as well. So we've actually kind of worked together or near each other, at least in some
Hmm.
capacity, for four different places, 4 or 5. And it was it was a brand built by a creative. It, and in a sense, it was really a brand first that didn't have a product. Mike had this idea and launched a video on the Facebook page that went viral and racked up something like 4 million views on this video in 5 months time, and then
Wow.
was able to take that to investors and say like, hey, look at this thing, we have a Facebook page that has more fans than the Aquafina Facebook page does, because no investor in their right mind is going to look at something, they're like, hey, we want to brand water and call it Liquid Death and make it look like beer. That's a pretty tough pitch. But then when you back it up with this already this sort of massive marketing and creative win, it's harder to turn that down. And so, from the very beginning, it's been this not just brand but company built on creative. So that was the amazing, exciting part to me. Is when I was looking at the opportunity, I was like, if I if I don't take this job, I never want to hear or see the name Liquid Death again, because I'm going to be so fucking jealous of every single thing that they do. And luckily, I made the right decision. And now it's a really, like I said, creatively driven business where I get to oversee and create all the marketing that we do in the kind of viral marketing moments that you're talking about, but also I have a hand helping with merch, which is a part of our business as well, and doing all the like mini launches for all the drops that we do with merch, and then also involved on the social side of things, which is sort of a super constantly always on thing that we have going. So I really, and then also we have a partnership with Live Nation, so getting into the music and experiential side of things
Hmm.
as well. So it's really, we're sort of basically trying to get our fingers into everything and turn whatever we get into upside down in the same way that we did by putting water in cans, essentially.
Absolutely. What is something that you've worked on in the past, or a couple things that you've worked on the past 9 months that you're really proud of, or maybe those viral moments, or something that
Mm.
that you really loved?
It's crazy because I to say that is we do we do something. You look at almost on a monthly basis. There's some big something that we do. I think it's funny, before my time here, I'm probably the only ad creative that could be like, I couldn't care less about the Super Bowl. It just, on a personal level, that it's such a time suck and an energy, in all sense of the word, suck at an agency, that you just spend months and months grinding on something that's
Mhm.
over in 30 seconds. And I think our Super Bowl spot, we we basically decided on it in a, maybe slight exaggeration, but a matter of minutes, and shot it back in like probably 5 or 6 months in advance. Didn't overthink it, and just did it, and then just put it out in the world. And so I'm kind of proud that we just had an idea, went for it, and didn't overthink it, and got a really very big for what it was. So I think
Was
that
that
was
the
exciting. Just
kids were drinking and the pregnant mom walks
yeah,
in?
yeah,
All
yeah. And the idea was like, basically, let's make like a old school style beer commercial, but instead of beer, it's water, and instead of 21 plus people, it's all kids. So
right.
it was so funny. It was so funny because the reaction people were like, this is the end of Western civilization. There's 50% of people hated it, 50% of people loved it, but the reaction was so strong. And I have to tell you, just on a personal level, it was the most innocent thing I've ever been a part of. We were literally in a house in Studio City here in LA with like 12 kids who were just dancing around drinking water for like 6 hours straight. It was so wholesome and wonderful and fun to be a part of. And so it it's so funny to hear that it was the exact opposite of what all the critics were
Oh,
essentially
there were
saying.
critics. I couldn't even, I didn't even know there were critics. I thought everybody kind of just understood, like everybody I knew and showed, they thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, spend any time on Twitter and you'll that's kind of the fun with Liquid Death too, is we obviously know that. I believe at one point we've said proudly not for everyone.
Yeah.
And even in my past time before me here, we, turned hate comments into a whole album, and we'll post comments about how much people hate us. We'll turn those into like ads that we run on social.
Mhm.
And we're like, people love us on the internet, and it's like some troll who's trying to take us down. So I don't
Yeah.
know
You
too
guys
many
are like,
brands that
when
would.
you do that, you're untouchable. I feel like when
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
like, it only makes you stronger.
exactly.
Yeah. I have so many questions on like how how you and your boss figure out like the tone and the branding of
Yeah,
it from the beginning, but that's a long story. What do we need to talk about? I guess I'm curious, what's like the creative process, and where do agencies come in this process of
yeah,
creating these ads and the branding? Is it all in-house? Are you working with agencies? What's it look like?
yeah. We work with a couple trusted agencies that we have some real personal connections with, and who we think really understand the brand. I think um, it's the brand. I think like comedy and crazy humor and that sort of thing can come off as being really easy from the outside. It's like, oh, you're just making a bunch of jokes. Oh, you're just coming up with crazy stuff. But I think the stuff that we do, the thing I really love about the brand is it's super nuanced. It's super considered. We really sweat every single little thing we do when we think about it. We don't overthink things, but we definitely really consider the guardrails and the humor and exactly what we're
Can you give us an
saying. And
example, maybe like on a project?
yeah, the I guess the biggest thing I'd say is like a lot of times people come, well, like we don't want to go into like bro humor. Like that's for other brands to do. That's not. I think a lot of times people look at Liquid Death and they're like, oh, it's skaters and it's metal and skulls, and there's like a lot of very like broy things that people pull might think that we would do, and so we get pitched all the time on ideas, and we're just like, no, this is not it. It's so we really are the way I actually think about it, and I kind of realized this more recently, is that rather than being a brand, I kind of think of us as like a character that we're playing. That like rather than like trying to get this list of like do's and don'ts of a character or of a brand, and it's like, our spirit animal is Jimmy Fallon, and here are the things we do say, and here are the things we don't say, and like that's like always these like crazy brand books I built. Like we don't have a fucking brand book.
Like a persona?
We were just having a discussion about this. Like it doesn't exist because like I don't even know. Like one, to like try to write all of it down would be impossible, and then two, no one even reads that shit to begin with. Like how many brand books have you been given like a 120-page thing and you're like PDF, and you're like, yeah, I'm never gonna read this. So like it's this funny like fallacy of like building a brand that we have to like spend all this time figuring out. And I think for me it's almost more about like, imagine we're a character and you have to get inside, and you're writing a TV show for this character. You're writing they're one of these characters in a show, and you have to like understand who they are and their motivations and the things they would or wouldn't do. And once you really start to get in the headspace of writing for a character, then it becomes like much more intuitive because you understand kind of a deeper level. And it also gives you a lot of flexibility where if you look at all our stuff, it's all over the place and it's on purpose. It's like purposely like it's like let's take Tony Hawk's blood and put it in a skate deck. Let's have a spot with kids that looks like a beer commercial. Let's open a vegan cannibal steakhouse restaurant. Like it's all over the map, but it all is coming from kind of the same central place. And even within that tone, I think we get to play in a lot of different things in the same way that like a character and a human are actually really complex creatures, and they can kind of go into a lot of spaces, and they can also interact with people. And I think the brand itself is just a really, people want to interact with it, and we want to interact back, and we want to make something that feels alive and reflexive of people, but also can surprise them. And so I think like thinking of it as a character that that I have to get into the headspace of it, or we have to as we're doing, it actually makes coming up with the ideas way easier, because you're like, oh, you just kind of look at it, you're like, oh, this is what the character would do. Like given this situation, hey, if we had a Super Bowl spot, this is how we do it. If we, had Tony Hawk, like how would we do that? Or whatever it is. But it's just sort of a different way to approach like the I think more outdated sense of a brand.
Gotcha. Yes. So you tap into some agencies to help you figure out what that character might say or do, or is that pretty much you guys?
Yeah, we've worked with Partyland, with Humanot, with Callan. Those are sort of our stable of agencies that they are great. They really help us out, kind of sometimes like identifying that idea that we want to go pursue.
Gotcha.
So like, yeah, Humanot had a hand in the Tony Hawk idea. And
yep, we have an episode where we talk about that.
Yeah, nice. And Partyland, the Steve-O water tattoo is from them. So yeah, we kind of lean on our friends when we have too much going on, or when we think we might need a boost of ideas.
Sure.
But for the most part, we really try to handle a lot of the work ourselves, because again, we live and breathe it every day, and so I think we understand the character the best. Yeah,
absolutely. How many people are on your team?
I'll just say it's quite small.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that. But
you don't need a lot of people. Like if you guys understand the brand, and who's when you come up with an idea, what's that process look like? Is it you and your CEO? And you're like, yep, we're doing it.
Sometimes it can be. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's that easy. That's the beautiful thing of having an ad creative running the business and the brand as well. It's like if we have an idea, we're like, it's not, we're not overthinking stuff where we have to slave away late nights chopping away at this thing and trying to unearth like that one idea. I was actually literally just talking with my friend an hour ago, and we were sort of saying, it's like you get to a point in your career where you're just like, your first idea is probably your best idea. I think I think for a long time when you're coming up, it's like, oh, that's such a first thought, and it's like, well, yeah, but the fact for us, it's like, with the fact that we're Liquid Death and we're already have this crazy thing that we're gonna try to do or promote or whatever. Like a lot of times, the first thought is probably the best idea. So it really frees us up to like quickly go after that and not think about it and just make stuff quickly. And it's why we're able to be really lean. We're still a startup, and why we're also able to do so much stuff is because slaving away like pitching stuff internally or making decks for people, or it's more about like, cool, let's go, that's idea's funny, let's go make it now.
It's
which is again
incredible.
coming from the agency world. It's yeah, it's there's a lot of parts I love about this job, but um, that's one of the best things for sure.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that your boss, the CEO or the founder, what Mike?
Co-founder, yeah, co-founder and CEO.
He was. What agencies was he at? And then we'll
Oh
talk
man,
about you.
he was originally at, well, I kind of like overlapped with him at Crispin for
Okay.
a brief period of time. He had he'd been at like he was actually at Humanot before my wife and I kind of became a part of Humanot a couple of years back. I think he was out at like 11 in San Francisco. He was at a place in Philly.
So you
He
guys
ended up at Vayner
overlapped.
for a while.
Okay.
We
And
didn't
he
we didn't
started.
overlap. Oh, sorry.
I was going to ask when did Liquid Death? When did he start Liquid Death?
It's about 3 years old now.
Okay. Wow.
But it's kind of interesting because if you look at like he was at Vayner, learned a lot of stuff there, learned a lot of stuff from Crispin, learned a lot of stuff at Humanot. He ended up going to Donor LA where I helped work with him on a freelance basis. But there's like the DNA of a lot of those places in the brand when you look at it, and the things that we prioritize and the way we act comes from a lot of kind of that same background. So I think it makes sense to have people that sort of had some of the similar um, career sort of nurturing and marinating, if you will, that he did. So like bring me in that we knew we had a lot of crossover in the way we
Okay.
thought about things. Yeah.
Interesting. So I want to dive
Yeah.
into now. I would love to keep on talking. We'll hint back at it. I want
Yeah.
to maybe get what your next ideas might. Some things coming up in the pipeline, but you probably won't tell me. But later on. But for now, I want to get to understand a little bit how you broke in. Name the podcast is
Yeah.
Breaking and Entering Advertising. So your story.
Yeah.
Where does it take place? When did you realize you wanted to do advertising?
No, man. I was I thought I was going to be a journalism major in college. And I was sitting in a big lecture class, like advertising 101. And I was just taking it just to like for shits and giggles. And I remember the professor had this example of like, he said, and I don't know if this is true or not. I've tried to research this and I can't corroborate this, but it doesn't really matter because it was the idea. But he was like, years ago, there were three words that they added to the bottle of A1 steak sauce, and it caused an immediate 20% jump in sales or something like that. And the three words were refrigerate after opening. And the whole idea was that for every one time you open your pantry door, which is where A1 steak sauce has previously been kept because it's shelf stable, it had its full preservatives. It doesn't need to go into a
Right.
refrigerator. For every one time you open your pantry door, you open your refrigerator door 10 times. And
Right.
so it was just merely by people seeing it and using it instead of getting to the pantry, it was in the refrigerator and people are pulling it out and using it. That had an immediate impact on sales. And that kind of like blew my little brain on on just like what the possibilities are of advertising. And I think it was sort of also like when I look back on that, it's a good example of the way that I think I like to approach and solve things is in a very sort of non-linear, non-traditional way. Like I said before, like I honestly could care less about making a Super Bowl spot, but if it's a Super Bowl spot that like that makes the whole world do a double take and pisses people off and does that, like now we're talking.
Yep.
Like the
Something
Coinbase
interesting.
one, like amazing. Yeah, it's like why are we just making pretty moving pictures? So I think that's kind of been my been what gets me excited my whole career. But I went there and then I went to the Creative Circus. Rest in
Well, why
peace.
did you go to Craven
Recently.
Circus? R.I.P. R.I.P. for sure.
Yeah.
Why did you go to you went to Georgia, right? Which is
Yeah.
a pretty
Yeah.
famous ad school. undergrad
Yeah,
or
but
grad school.
it was really turning out at the time. It was really turning out like account managers and media people and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Most
And I
undergrads
was
do
like,
that still.
exactly. And I was like, oh, I kind of realized late in the game. I was like, I was doing creative on a project. I was like, oh, I want to be a creative. You know,
Bam.
and so I was like, my last year there, I realized I was like, well, I'm gonna have to go do two more years anyway. So I
Yeah.
went to the Creative Circus and just had an incredible, incredible time there.
Did you make a LinkedIn
And
post commemorating your experience there?
I just
Like everybody
commented on
else.
a lot of other people. Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't yet. I'm waiting until there's less noise and then I can make it.
I've
Um,
literally seen that same post. It's like, all right, now that there's less noise, I want to shout out Creative
really
Circus. Yeah.
funny.
No, it speaks
Um,
to how great the institution is. But wait, what you realize late? Like, I want so people can understand this.
yeah,
You
yeah,
realize
yeah.
late in your undergrad, you want to be creative. Like, what's late? Rough.
Late is like my senior year, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but the whole program, I was taking like ethics and advertising
Of
classes and media
course.
planning classes because I was like media because it was within the journalism school. So it's like when you think of it in the framework of journalism, I think it's a much more academic take on it. And then we were doing these big group projects where I was quote unquote the creative director on it, and I was like, oh, this is what it is.
Right.
Like this, the writing, the funny things, and coming up with the ideas and the crazy strategy. Like
Advertising.
that's what I want to do. Yeah, that's advertising.
Right.
And so, and I was okay with that. I was like, cool. I had a great time in undergrad, but I kind of quickly identified that I needed to like continue developing the creative side of it. And I found when I got to Creative Circus, I actually ended up having to unlearn a lot of the things that I learned in undergrad. Just sort of I was like, oh, now it's just about like taking pictures of my poop in a toilet bowl and stapling it into a sketchbook and drawing some crazy shit around it. It was like going back to preschool again. You had to kind of
Right.
like deconstruct yourself and then build yourself back up. And so that was the fun of ad school, was just like rebuilding your creative self in this and feeding into this way that I never really knew you could before.
Love that. Love that.
You know, uh,
So you did that 2
um,
years internship, maybe.
well,
What happened after that? What was your break in?
well, well, it was actually this is my break-in was actually before my 2 years was up. So we my one of my friends who now happens to be my wife, Liza Bayless, and I worked on a project together that we applied for. We put in for the Cannes Future Lion
Mm-hmm.
Award, and we ended up winning it along with another another team who Katie Hornday is now the like CCO at Barkley, and Karen Gireffi is she was the like head of Under Armour for a bit. I'm not sure where she's now. Gireffi's not her last name anymore. Forget her last name, her new last name, but basically like we won 2 out of the 5 future lines in the world that year. And
Wow.
the hilarious thing, the funny thing was like we found out we won, and we were like, "Where is Can? How do you pronounce it?" We did like we just
Cans.
had no, yeah, we just like had no idea what we are doing,
So do you
and
go there? Like, if you win it, I have no clue. You don't-
yeah, so we didn't either, and basically we found out we won. We were freaking out. This is in my sixth quarter, and the sixth quarter, we were like freaking out. We're like, "Oh my god, we won Can!" And then we get this follow up email that comes to us through the placement director that was like, "Hey, just wanted to see if you guys were going to be in Cannes next week to pick up your award." And we were
Next
like,
week.
"If we're, yeah, we're like, we're
Yeah.
in Cannes next week." Like, and we're like, we don't know where Cannes is.
It's in
So we're just,
Indiana. If people didn't know.
yeah, we're
Can
just like
Indiana.
Google mapping like Cannes, and we're like, oh my god, it's in France. Like this shows how like we had no idea what was going on. And so we quickly looked like plane tickets and all that. It was like, oh, to fly 4 people to the French Riviera in a week is going to be like 6 grand right there out the door. And
Yeah.
then to pay for hotels for a week and all that, that's another 4 grand. So we're like, well, okay, so we need to raise as students, we need to have $10,000 literally tomorrow. Like, what are we going to do? And so I think we just like went to I was like, well, how do they raise money in movies? I don't know why that was the go to, but I was like, we could throw a kegger, and I was like, well, I've lost money on every kegger I've ever thrown, and I was like,
Exactly.
or like a car wash, or we were just like, I don't like, how are we gonna do this? And then we kind of came up with this idea. We're like, what if we had a bake sale and we just sold cookies for $500 a piece? And then that way we only have to sell 20 cookies because each one is going to cost $500.
Yeah.
And
That would work.
yeah, well, not just in theory, because like we basically overnight we had this amazing photographer friend, Bobby Prokenbeck, who shot like a photo of us with this like banner that said cookies for can, and we threw up like a really basic website overnight and just tried to like blast out to literally every high up at an agency that we knew, all the ad blogs at the time. It was like, oh man, ad rants and like all the like old school advertising blogs that existed back then, and pulled an all-nighter to get this thing up. And then the next day, like it was like crickets, and we're like, we're never going to France. And a couple hours later, we got a call from Leo Burnett, and they were like, hey, we want to buy it. And
Wait,
so
say that
basically
again.
they
You
were
you
like,
cut out right. You cut out for a second there.
oh,
Leo Burnett called and said what?
we want to buy a dozen cookies. And so literally they were basically like, here's $6,000 right here.
Oh my god.
And um and then it got posted to some of the ad blogs, and we started getting press off of it. And then AKQA, who hosts the award, was like, hey, we'd love to buy 2 cookies. And then we had
Nice.
a couple other people come in and donate their own money or agency money and all this stuff. And so literally within about 24 hours we'd raised the 10 grand that we needed, which was just incredible, humbling. Just it was nuts. And it was kind of the first time that I'm aware of, at least, that like a student group had tried to do kind of like this viral breakthrough moment to promote themselves.
Wow.
And
That is
yeah,
incredible.
and so we got all the money. We went to Cannes. We had this amazing amazing week there. And then on top of that, we were like the cookie kids who
Yeah.
were going everywhere because everyone had seen it. So we got to
Right.
talk to all these. We weren't just like random students. We'd already had this. We'd gotten all this press off of this thing, and so people wanted to talk with us and chat. And so it wasn't just like a free trip to Cannes. It was also this amazing time where we got to meet David of David and Goliath and all these high powered people. And as a result of that, Katie and Karen, their idea that they had was for Starbucks, and they met a recruiter from Wyden Kennedy at a party, and she offered them a job to come work on Starbucks at Wyden.
Oh my
And
goodness.
they were talking about it, and then ended up Katie wanted to go to Crispin because her boyfriend was actually an account guy there. And so they were like, Lauren, the recruiter from Lauren Ranke from
Mhm.
Wyden, she just left there. She reached out to me and was like, hey, Karen needs a partner. Do you want to come be Karen's partner in Portland? And yeah, so like basically a year and a half through school, we got offered a kind of like basically a freelance to hire position at Wyden, and so left school to go do that.
Like, so yeah, I would have
Which,
left right there. It's cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the really crazy thing is we ended up doing that job 2 or 3 months, and we're coming up at the end of the time, and they're like, hey, we want to offer you the position like full time,
Mm.
but for some reason there's this hiring freeze agency wide at the moment, and I had I had there was a portfolio review for Creative Circus happening like that week in New York,
Yeah.
and I didn't need a job. All my friends were still in school and they were still working, and I basically booked a ticket because I didn't know whether I was going to get this wine thing, and I was like, they're like, go to New York, have fun at the portfolio review, and then come back and we'll have the papers for you to sign. And so I went, and honestly, I was probably like a huge D bag at this review because I didn't need to be there because I was like, oh, I just got this my offer at Wine and Kennedy, and meanwhile my friends are like sweating 2 years of work trying to shake their moneymakers for recruiters and stuff. And I in retrospect, I probably was not as nice about it as I should have been. But as we're sitting there, like an hour or two in, Karen come or one of the recruiters I've been talking to people, and I was like, oh, I actually don't need a job. I'm just hanging out. I have this thing from Wide, and when people are like, oh, what are you doing here? Like, what's your deal? And I was like, oh, I actually was already going to come, but blah, blah, blah. So I told the story. And like the third person I talked to, she came back and she had her BlackBerry, and she was like, hey, did you see this? And it was this Ad Age news alert that was like, I still remember the headline was Wyden and Kennedy and Starbucks decide to part ways.
Oh,
And I was like, holy shit.
yeah.
And that was why there was a hiring freeze, and it was so secretive that they didn't. Basically, Dan Wyden and other people decided that Starbucks, they just wanted to cut ties, and so I basically got laid off from a job that I had not yet signed paperwork to get.
Right.
and
But you were working there. Were you
and
interning there right before that?
yeah, I was, yeah, but the end of it was a freelance thing, but it was like a
Right.
freelance to hire
Really?
type deal,
Right.
and so the contact was contract. It was basically coming to an end, and so
Right.
I was
Right.
a week out from that. And so I basically lost the job that they were about to hire me full time
Right.
for.
Right. And you're acting like a
And
D-bag saying like, I don't need you guys
well,
in a way.
I wasn't acting like a diva. I was just like, I probably was a little. I guess I was probably more smug than I should have been
Sure.
to
Sure.
my
But that a
my
little
poor friend.
cockiness, a little confidence might actually help you out. So I'm curious, like, what
Well,
happened from
the
that?
crazy thing is, but then it's like I literally lost my job in a portfolio review. So it's like
So,
you actually can't lose your job in a better place than that. So
right.
then the rest of the day, people are like, "So where are you at?" And I was like, "Well, until about half an hour ago, I had a job at Wyden and Kennedy, Portland." And then the really crazy thing was, I ended up I landed at Crispin Porter Bogusky like really shortly thereafter,
Mhm.
because the recruiter was the first person I talked to in that day was the recruiter from Crispin,
Mhm.
who, and he didn't even know about the whole. I talked to him before the whole Wyden thing went down,
Yeah.
and he just reached out randomly and was like a month later and was like, "Hey, I really like your stuff. Like, if the Wyden thing doesn't work out, let me know." And I
Let
was
me
like,
know.
"Oh
Yeah.
my god!"
It didn't work out.
And yeah, and what I didn't know until like actually a year or two later was that the cookie for can thing had been passed around within the walls of Crispin, and like from the press on that, they were like, "Oh, we have to hire this kid."
Right.
And so it's this like wild chain of events in like literally 3 months of my life from start to finish was this like whirlwind of can and Wyden and Crispin and all the cookies and all this stuff all happening at once. And then so I through that whole thing, I ended up at Crispin for about 5 years and
That's
really like
incredible.
ended up cutting my teeth there. Yeah. So I was very lucky.
And
Um,
you got married.
I did, yeah, to much later, but yes, to my future alliance partner. So it
Oh,
worked out.
that's a great
We actually
story.
had Dan. Yeah, we also had Dan Balzer, who was the head of
Oh,
the ad
yeah.
department at Creative Circus. He was our officiant at the wedding, so it was just
Oh,
it's all
that's
full circle.
amazing. Yeah, he's got an episode on here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's amazing. He's a good dude.
Yeah, not as I could be.
Yep.
Wow. I have so many questions about that story, but I guess like what are the main takeaways? Like what can we synthesize from like what can we learn from this? Win you have to win a future
Yeah.
can line, come up with a really
That's all you
interesting
have to
press
do.
release, and then raise money and go to can network, get hired at
Yep.
Wyden. Like what do we have to what can we
It's that
disseminate
simple.
to? So
I think no, I think the thing that I hate quotes. I think they're lazy, but I'm about to use one. I think one of my favorite quotes is just that it's like this idea of like the harder you work, the luckier you get.
yeah,
And I was kind I was serious before when I said I really just got lucky. And I think that's true. That's what it takes in this career. It's like lucky that someone thinks your idea that you thought was kind of funny is like worth posting on their blog, and lucky that the right person saw it at Leo and and they reached out and had the money to do that. It's like a lot of luck. When you work at stuff, you put yourself in the right situations for luck to happen. And I, as a student and even beyond, I think I always approached my career or my potential career with the same energy I wanted to put against making great work. And I think for people who want to be creative communicators as a profession, every communication you should have is should be creative, right? And so like I kind of briefed myself in a way when I was in school was like the product is me, the target market are creative directors who I want to work for, and my budget is $0. Like,
right.
go. What do I do with that? And so when you approach your career in that way, I think it becomes a fun thing to solve, just like a fun ad to make. And when you approach it with that kind of like problem solving and fun, it just becomes a lot easier to do, and people can kind of feel it. And so I think like again that lightheartedness of the idea of cookies for can, like that's what people sparked to, and they saw that we were having fun with it, and then they wanted to help us. So yeah, I think throughout the and again like it, going all the way back to Liquid Death, it's like the idea was it's like let's put water in a can because no one else does that. Like let's step back for a second and think about this. It's like why does no one put water in a can? And well, it's actually this marketing misconception that everyone has played into for countless years, that like consumers need to see the water inside of the can to know that it's pure water. Like that's really
Mm,
the only reason why water comes in plastic bottles, is because they don't think that they think people need to see it. But we drink all kinds of stuff out of opaque cans all the
right.
time. But because of this marketing idea that we had to do this has led to literally our oceans and beaches, and we're filling with plastic, single-use plastic waste, right? It's literally a marketing problem that's generated the Pacific garbage patch and all
Yeah.
these other health problems that come of it. And so it's like, so let's look at that and let's find a creative solution that is unlearning and unthinking all the things that have come before us, and from like an outsider creative perspective from the industry. It's the same thing of like, hey, how do we increase sales? Let's put 3 words on an A1 steak sauce bottle. Like maybe the best solution isn't just making another ad. Maybe it's something else. And so I think like maybe the best solution for your career isn't just going on LinkedIn and trying to stalk people that way, or however people are doing it. Like maybe it's finding your own kind of path and approaching it in this really creative manner that you'll enjoy a lot more, and I guarantee will be lead you to a lot more success throughout your career.
I love it. I'm at a loss for words. This is you tied it up nicely. This is fantastic episode.
I was
Fantastic
sweating that
advice.
one. I was really trying to tie it all together
You
at the
tied it
end.
well.
But like,
You got it. I wasn't worried one bit. I knew you had it all taken care of. Can people reach out to you? I know we'll list your resources that you recommend in our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. But anything, how can people reach out to you? Is it on LinkedIn? Do they need to be creative and maybe sell you a cookie, or what's the way to do that?
I mean, I'm easily bribed. I'm look, I'm a sucker for great ideas that like get you noticed if it's a good one. I think there's also a lot of bad ways to do kind of gimmicky stuff. So
Yes, it's a fine line for sure.
it's a fine line. It's really hard. It's that's what we're doing with Liquid Death. It's a fine line, and we have to.
Yeah, the guy that Matt Kennedy
I'm
requested somebody $50,000 to be a junior copywriter at High Dive in Chicago. That was
right.
awesome. Like that was subtle,
exactly.
easy. It blew up. That
Yeah,
was a good one.
yeah. You don't again. It can be super. It can be $0. It can be a very simple idea that you come up with in 5 minutes. It doesn't have to. You don't have to overthink it. But yeah. I'm happy. LinkedIn. I'm all over the internet. You can find me. My site is not updated. I even wrote this sickurl.com that has my contact info there, or just reach out. My email is andypearson1.0@gmail.com.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm always happy to help. Like people help me along the way, so I'm very grateful to like I said, all the people along the way that helped me along, and there's many more that I haven't even listed. We didn't even get to talk about here. So hopefully I can do the same for a handful of other people as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Andy. I have no more questions.
All right. That's all I got too.
Cool. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Yeah, thanks, man.
Did you hear anything on this episode about a job you'd like to have someday, soon, in advertising, strategy, design? The kind of job where you use your brain and your creativity? If you did, chances are a portfolio can really help you get that job. That's where Chicago Portfolio School comes in. They have programs and classes that help you show off your thinking and get you the job you want. So visit them at chicagoportfolio.com. And if you drop my name, Gino, into the chat box, they'll send you more info and a cool Sharpie. Or just some more info. You can decide that. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering Advertising podcast. If you like what you heard, it would mean a lot to us and help us grow and get better guests, better break-ins if you could go to Apple Podcasts and leave us 5 stars and a small review if you have the time. Be sure to connect with our guests if you like what they said by going to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. It's all one word, Breaking and Entering Pod on Instagram. We have links to their portfolios and their LinkedIn. And they want to connect, so do that. And thank yous. Thank you to Mikey Malarkey, our audio engineer, and Uchan Zhang, our creative director. Can't do it without you two, and a team from the University of Illinois. It's a student team from the agency called AdBuzz, their PR agency, and it's been a pleasure working with them. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week with another amazing guest.